Carter. Much appreciated. Immediately following Carter's presentation, we're going to hear from Elam on one of their alternatives. But before we do that, as always, I want to open it up to any questions from the committee members about all the material that you just heard. Yeah, roll.
I have a couple questions, actually. Now you say that permanent impoundment is no longer a threat or an exposure route. How does EPA plan to break the barrier, the fact that the water is pushing out to the lake and out into the groundwater? I mean, because as long as permanent impoundment has a constant water feed, which will for life, it'll always be moving in the direction of the lake and to the colony and to the wetlands, which is a problem, which has been introduced because of the mine, not because of natural.
Sure. So I wouldn't say that permanent impoundment isn't a source at all. Today it still has mining influence. The hope is that over time, as input of mine influence water into the impoundment is reduced, that mining sort of footprint or imprint on the water during impoundment will also be reduced. To answer your question, as far as permanent impoundment water moving outward, the focus feasibility study describes a number of potential cleanup options to address the water that is moving through the waste rock dam. Before the focus feasibility study was final, we're also going to consider other options for intercepting potential contaminated water moving north in the direction towards the north wetland. And there's a number of potential options that have been discussed, and I think Elam are going to talk about one potential route. The focus feasibility study isn't final. When it is, we will have another public meeting and invite the public to come to that and talk in a lot more detail about the full range of alternatives that we've analyzed and what those cleanup actions would look like. They include things such as potentially a cutoff wall. I mentioned that in the field. Potentially excavation of water, of waste material from the waste rock dam, and others that are going to be described fully in that document.
And then on the public outreach side, I know there's a fish consumption advisory for OEHA. Where is EPA at on the questions that I had arised to you last year in public notice? Notices out in the county around the lake, notifying the public of this issue, and this probably because I feel EPA has a responsibility to that as an overseer of the mine.
Right.
And and you said that EPA is going to build their own fish consumption advisory, or looking at that. I'm kind of, that confuses me because funding is put to OEHA to do that scientific work, and they have done that scientific work, but yet now none of the agencies who have that policy and regulatory authority are using that work to educate the public.
Right. So not enough has been done to make sure that the public is aware of the fish advisory, clearly, in my opinion. OEHA develops the fish advisories, the California Department of Public Health performs outreach. EPA's role until we have a final decision document is kind of opaque, but we recognize that not enough has been done, and we're trying to correct that. We are hoping that we can partner with the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment and California Department of Public Health to help them to perform the outreach. You rightly said it. EPA doesn't have expertise in the area of behavioral sciences on helping people to become educated on that sort of information and actually seeing changes in behavior over time. It's not an area that EPA has expertise, and OEHA and CPH, they do have that expertise. Last year, as you mentioned, we sort of started on, could EPA do this ourselves? And the answer is that we're not the experts in that area, and maybe it doesn't make sense for us to try to do it ourselves, but are there things that we can do to help the experts to perform that work on a larger scale? And so that's sort of the path that we're trying to go forward now.
And then on the second side of public outreach, I know there's a responsibility for EPA to have an updated file of all the documents. That's non-existent around here. I'm wondering if EPA has it. If they're planning on doing it so that the public has availability to all these documents that are out there that talk about what's going on. It doesn't exist with the library.
Right.
down the street.
I was gonna say,
They don't even know about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll talk with them. There's supposed to be a hard copy administrative record at the library, but even that is very old, too old to be useful. So EPA has been revising, changing the way in which our websites are formatted. I think it really, from my perspective, it makes probably the most sense to have this information on the internet so that people can access it easily. And the websites have been reformatted. The Sulphur Bank site still only has older documents. It really needs to be updated. And that's on the short list of to-dos for EPA about the site.
Even for that older information, we can link to it in the meeting summary so that everyone has that. At least that older information, so you have something in front of you. So I think Sarah had a question, then over to Mike. Sarah?
Could you speak about the other contaminants that are elevated or more available in the groundwater and in the lake because of the mining operations, because of the Superfund site? So could you, as I understand, there's elevated arsenic and some other contaminants. What are, so I guess my first question is, are they elevated because of the mining? And then do you have a sense of where, in terms of groundwater, where that plume is? I know there are residents who have wells in the area, as well as residents who get their water directly from the lake in that area, even on private systems. So just, I mean, we talk a lot about mercury, but what are the other contaminants, and what are the solutions to controlling this?
Right. The water that enters Clearlake contains elevated levels of a number of other metals in addition to mercury, including aluminum and selenium and arsenic, as you mentioned. Actually, John Lucero, who has joined us, might be able to talk a little bit more in terms of the relative contributions of contaminants in the lake. But as far as the drinking water intakes, we've tested the drinking water intakes for residents, the nearest drinking water intakes to the mine site in the past, and the levels of site-related contaminants were not high enough to be of any risk to human health. And that is another component that we are considering in that human health risk assessment that I mentioned. We'll be looking at specific water consumption rates and seeing if you drink enough water, is there a risk? But to date, there's no understanding that there is a direct risk to drinking water intakes as a result of Sulphur Bank. John, can you talk a bit at all about the water quality impacts?
Right, so your question was specific to groundwater and the movement of groundwater and the use of groundwater. When we talk about other contaminants at Sulphur Bank, we always say mercury, antimony, and arsenic. That's really in the source areas in the soils. So that's a real important distinction. That's something that we would have direct contact to or inhalation of. So in the groundwater, it's primarily mercury within the groundwater plume. That plume, it sits within an area that's impacted by the geothermal springs. So all of that water has a total dissolved solids, a salt content that is above any potable drinking water or municipal use. So it's not usable water to where somebody's going to say, I want to put a well in here and use that water. It's just too salty. Then you have the migration of the groundwater. Migration of groundwater from Herman Impoundment to the lake, that picks up mercury and some acid as it passes through waste rock. But it has very low concentration of mercury in Herman Impoundment. And the acidity is not as strong as when it passes through the acid generating materials as it moves from Herman Impoundment into the lake. Did that answer all your questions?
Yes, and I guess the other component is just what about these contaminants in terms of fish or other aquatic organisms or terrestrial animals, in terms of aluminum buildup or other things? So, is that part of your health assessment, health risk assessment that you're doing, or are you just looking at mercury?
In terms of wildlife, that would be an ecological risk assessment, and that's not what's currently underway, although an ecological risk assessment for optical unit 2, the Clearlake site, is in the plan for the site. The human health risk assessment will be looking at the whole range of contaminants. Mercury is very likely to be very much the lion's share of risk. The levels of other metals that wind up in Clearlake as a result of the site, to date, our understanding is that it's very limited. It's not a major contributor to water quality issues in Clearlake. Aluminum that you mentioned, when permanent impoundment used to overflow into Clearlake, there would actually an aluminum flock would form because aluminum levels in the impoundment were quite high. Over the past, since 2000, we've seen aluminum levels come down really dramatically. They're now, they've dropped by about 88%. It's not clear whether or not there's still any aluminum flock being formed in Clearlake as a result of sulfur bank. Aluminum is harmful to fish. It'll block their ability to breathe through their gills. But there's no evidence that that aluminum is an ongoing problem. It was really more associated with punctuated discharge events. Yeah, as far as other contaminants, I'm happy to get back to you. I can look into it more.
Okay.
Sure.
I think Mike had a question.
One of the last things you went over was the northwest rock pile back on slide 18.
Yeah.
I worked with DCDs back in the 90s and Elam in the Elam Indian Colony in the 2000s. And I was always, I guess, there was a concern about groundwater movement from the northwest pit through the waste rock piles into the wetlands. And the wetlands were always my most special area of concern because of the anaerobic sediments. There's ideal conditions for methylation of mercury.
Right.
So if you move your waste rock piles into the pit, clarified for a long time for me, I thought there was geothermal water coming up into that northwest pit. And would that still be moving towards the wetland? Or what's your thoughts on trying to stop groundwater or surface runoff from moving towards those wetlands?
Yeah, it's a good point. So there are regulations that apply to that action associated with the water board that mean that mine waste can be no closer than 5 feet from the highest elevation of measured groundwater. So what the action entails is putting clean fill into the bottom of that pit and then putting mine waste above that so that there isn't contact between that groundwater that you mentioned and the mine waste.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's take one more question, and then I want to switch over to the presentation on sulfur bank. Jim?
And this is a real quick one because I know you're not going to have an answer. But you were talking about also the environmental health hazard assessment, and then you also gave out a guide to eating fish from Clearlake.
Right.
This is more of an immediate problem. When I read this, I see a few things that are probably not right. I'm kind of concerned about that.
Okay.
So what I would really like to understand is anyone doing any additional work on actually which part of the fish to eat, how to cook it, how to prepare it, that sort of thing. And my background on this is pretty limited, but I will tell you that I was part of the team that discovered the mercury in the fish in 1975. And what we did, I was on the environmental side doing the pollution stuff in the lab. What we found was that mercury was concentrated in the muscle tissue of the fish, whereas the PCBs and the DDD was found in the fat bodies of the fish. And this doesn't describe that, it lumps them together.
Right.
So I'm thinking that there's different cooking preparations that would be helpful in the immediate, because people are using those fish, and if we got that, rather than something that's vague as this, I really think that'd be helpful.
It's a fair point. The fish advisory that OEHA produces is based on a format that is statewide. And so that format is speaking to exactly what you're talking about, PCBs accumulating in fatty tissue. That's not really relevant for mercury. Mercury does accumulate in muscle tissue. So the fish advisory has recommendations about which parts of the fish to eat, and those are seen as protective against PCBs and no worse as far as mercury goes, because people are going to eat usually the muscle tissue of the fish anyway. So that's my understanding of it. For more than that, we'd have to talk with it.
Additional research is not happening. It's, OEHA is a literature review group.
Right.
And I was wondering about the science part. Is there any additional science?
They have revised that fish advisory in front of you just back in August of 2018, but that was based more on fish populations. They removed the Clearlake hitch from that advisory because its populations are low and it's now a protected species. So as far as I'm aware, there's not a means of cooking fish to reduce your mercury exposure because it's in the muscle tissue, which is really the meat that most people want to eat.
I'm sorry, my fault. Different question. is there additional research that's going to happen?
No, not planned at this moment.
So we are behind schedule here. I want to make sure we get to the Elam portion as well. But a question to the committee members, since the issue of fish tissue consumption has come up both in the tour and today, would it be helpful for all of you as a committee to get people from in here to deliver a presentation in the future?
So one of the takeaways that we're taking from this is a conversation with both OEHIR and the Department of Public Health based on your question, Caroline, and we'll bring that all together. So we will commit to coming back to the committee at the next meeting with either how we move forward a discussion or anything else like that. So we will take that away as a state entities to come back to the committee.
Wonderful, thank you. So we do really need to move on to the next one, but Sarah, you had a specific question?
Well, I believe that EPA is supposed to be conducting fish tissue testing every 10 years. I remember seeing that in some of your literature about Clearlake. So that's, you know, if any entity is out there that's doing fish tissue methyl mercury or total mercury analysis, that's the type of information that OEHA would then bring back to their, you know, to their review. We did provide them with both EPA and OEHA with our data from 2015 fish from around the lake, and there were elevated levels of mercury from all arms of the lake of many species. But I believe that you're supposed to be doing a certain amount of monitor every 10 years, as per what I've seen on your website.
I'm not sure what that's from. I'd have to talk to you about it more. The work that we're planning on doing with USGS is going to include fish tissue.
Okay, so that'll be the updates.
Very much.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, we'd like to transition over to Elam's presentation on their alternative 8, I believe. And before we move to the presentation, Alex is the Elam representative on the committee. Did you have anything you wanted to queue up or say?
No.
Okay, that was easy.
Yeah, can you queue up my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, actually it should be.
I'm not a technical guy, so I got to flip phone. Just the PowerPoint presentation. Presentation, you just what's on there. Yeah. No, I put it. All right. Right there. Just have it. There you go. Yeah, but it won't show up. Okay. Bear with me. I'm Frank Kirshner. I have a PhD in hydrogeology. I've been working in Superfund since 1982, when I was even younger than Carter. I represent, I have two partners. One's a PhD toxicologist, the other one is a PhD mining engineer. We specialize in representing Native American tribes on Superfund sites as well as the Old Manhattan Project sites. For example, Hanford Nuclear Reservation and then also Los Alamos. And so I'm going to take you, I wish we had more time. By the way, the presentation that we're going to see will be loaded on Elam's website along with 2 or 3 other, and sometimes, okay, 2 or 3 other webinars, and they're produced in YouTube, so you can see it live video. Here's the Salt Bank Mercury Mine Superfund site. All that you saw today, it's hard to see. I've been to hundreds of Superfund sites. It's hard to see groundwater plumes, you know, standing on the ground. But here's a picture. This is operable unit 1. And operable unit 2 is predominantly the remainder of the lake. Operable unit 1 is the mining area, and it includes all the waste around here, the light colored material as well. And then Carter mentioned some of that. This is the wetlands. This is part of operable unit 2, the lake and the wetlands, I believe, are part of the same operable unit. This is Elam reservation on 50 acres, and Chairman knows I call it the postage stamp because it's the smallest reservation I've ever worked on. I mean, and I represent tribes all over the place, and it's 50 acres. Again, this is not a shot. This is where you were today. This is operable unit 1, and then operable unit 2. I'm going to show some slides from some work that UC Davis did in the past, showing that there's contamination from the mine site clearly up into the upper arm. This is I was going to do a Google flyby, but I don't want to waste a lot of time. But it's, I'd recommend you guys look at it sometime, or at least look at our website, because we have this produced. Again, operable unit 1, operable unit 2. The roundhouse is going to come up in the next slide, some of the older pictures. So that the carrying capacity clearly required lake resources and surrounding lands to sustain the tribe. It was only 50 acres. How are you going to support a natural sustenance lifestyle, on 50 acres? So when BIA put the land into trust for the tribe, they recognized that the tribe was going to rely on the lake. It always happens. You heard Jim Brown, one of the tribal members, saying that he believed that people living here for 22,000 years. Well, the reason is because it's got everything you need. I mean, you get all your protein right out of the lake, and that's predominantly what their diet was based on, was fish protein. This is a picture of the roundhouse back at the turn of the last century. This was it when I first started working for the tribe in roughly '99. You can see the mine rock down here, waste rock, right down in the heart of the reservation. There's a white-tailed deer on the waste rock dam. Tribe eats that too. And then this was taken last summer during the Tule Boat Festival. So it just shows that the resources are used. So Indian reservations are land set aside and reserved by the United States for the benefit of the tribe, and are designed to provide all the necessary sustenance for the subject tribe. Like I said, the other reservations I've worked on are larger, and it's because they didn't have the resources like Elam had. Reservation can be conceptualized as an island with finite resources. Each acre lost to contamination or suspected contamination, or each acre that is developed for economic purposes results in a reduction of carrying capacity of the land